65 million years ago, our world was an alien planet, a realm sculpted by time and ruled by titans. For over 150 million years, the Earth had belonged to them. An unbroken dynasty of reptilian giants, thriving in a world far warmer and richer than our own. The air itself was different, thick with oxygen, fueling a biosphere of unimaginable scale and ferocity. Continents drifted across a global ocean, creating shallow seas that teemed with life, while vast inland forests, dominated by colossal ferns and conifers, stretched from pole to pole. This was the late Cretaceous period, the zenith of an age. It was a world teeming with life, a planet in its primordial prime. Immense, lumbering creatures roamed these lands, their calls echoing through the humid air. Herds of armored herbivores, mountains of flesh and bone, moved like living islands through the vegetation. In the shadows, colossal predators waited, engines of muscle and instinct honed by millennia of evolutionary warfare. The planet's ecosystems were a complex, brutal, yet perfectly balanced tapestry of predator and prey. Every niche was filled, every corner of the globe conquered. It was an age of giants, a primordial paradise of raw, untamed power. Life, in its most majestic and terrifying forms, had reached a glorious, seemingly eternal plateau. But this long era of stability, this reign of thunder lizards, was destined for a violent and absolute end. Far beyond the cradle of our solar system, another evolutionary story had reached its own conclusion. In a dying star system, a civilization had faced its own extinction. They were a species that had mastered genetics, engineering, and interstellar travel, but they could not outrun the death of their sun. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, they abandoned their organic forms, encoding their consciousness and genetic blueprint into nigh-indestructible crystalline matrices. They engineered a new delivery system, a method of cosmic seeding designed for conquest. From the cold, silent darkness of deep space, they came, not in gleaming starships, but in artificial rocks, biomechanical arcs designed to ferry a new form of life across the interstellar void. These were not mere vessels. They were weapons, terraforming engines, and wombs, all in one. For centuries they drifted, dormant and patient, their internal systems scanning the galaxy for a suitable host. They found one. A vibrant blue-green world, rich in the carbon and water they required, but occupied. The planet's dominant life forms were a biological dead end, powerful but unintelligent, an obstacle to be removed. The arcs adjusted their trajectories, accelerating toward their target with cold, calculated intent. As they entered the atmosphere, they became a terrifying celestial omen, a shower of fire in the night sky. To the creatures below, it was a strange and fleeting spectacle. They had no concept of what was descending upon them. Each one was a harbinger of doom, a seed of destruction aimed at the heart of the old world. The impact was cataclysmic. The primary arc struck the shallow sea of the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of 10 billion atomic bombs. The initial blast vaporized trillions of tons of water and rock, carving a crater over 100 miles wide. A wall of fire and superheated debris expanded outwards at hypersonic speed, incinerating everything in its path for 1,000 miles in every direction. The seismic shock registered on a planetary scale, triggering mega-earthquakes and volcanic eruptions across the globe. The age of dinosaurs did not end with a whimper. It ended in a global firestorm. But the immediate destruction was only the beginning. The explosions threw trillions of tons of dust, soot, and vaporized sulfur into the atmosphere, creating a thick, impenetrable shroud that blocked out the sun. A long, artificial winter began. Global temperatures plummeted, plunging the planet into a deep freeze. Photosynthesis ceased. The great forest withered and died, the foundation of the entire food chain collapsing in a matter of months. The survivors of the initial blast now faced a slower, more agonizing death from starvation and cold. Their reign was over, not by a random act of cosmic chance, but by a calculated, deliberate invasion. The planet was being sterilized, wiped clean for its new masters. As the old world choked and died, the instruments of its destruction began to stir. Deep within the cooling impact craters, shielded from the apocalypse they had created, the arcs activated their final protocol. The crystalline shells, having fulfilled their purpose as projectiles, now became incubators. Using the raw geothermal energy from the impact sites, they initiated the re-sequencing process, gestating the new bodies their consciousness would inhabit. From within their crystalline shells, a new life form emerged. They were the Draconians, a race of intelligent bipedal reptilians. Taller and more slender than the primitive beasts they were replacing, they were a fusion of alien intellect and terrestrial reptilian DNA, perfectly adapted for the world they would now inherit. They stepped out into a world of twilight and frost, a landscape of death and decay. For the dying creatures of Earth, the last shivering survivors of a fallen kingdom, it was a vision of hell. But for the Draconians, it was the perfect beginning. The air was thin and cold, the sun a pale ghost, the competition all but eliminated. This was not a setback, it was a feature of their design, a clean slate. They surveyed their new dominion not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Their long journey was over. Their conquest had just begun. They had not come to coexist. They had come to replace. The eons passed, a relentless march of time across the surface world. Continents drifted, mountains rose and fell, and ice ages came and went. Through it all, the Draconians, the ancient survivors, waited. Deep within their subterranean strongholds, cities of cold light and alien geometry, they became masters of patience. They were no longer just survivors, they were architects. From these hidden bases, they began their great work, a project of unimaginable scale and timeline. They became the Shapeshifters, a name whispered only by the most secret of human societies. Using technologies that fused genetic science with quantum mechanics, they began to subtly guide the course of evolution on the planet they now considered their own. They weren't merely observing life, they were curating it, pruning the evolutionary tree and nurturing specific branches, all in preparation for their ultimate goal. They were searching for a key that would unlock dominion over the planet. Then, after epochs of experimentation, they found it, the dawn of humanity. In these primitive bipedal apes, they saw the perfect vessel. It wasn't their strength or speed that was remarkable, but their nascent consciousness. They possessed a unique combination of adaptability, a capacity for abstract thought, and a powerful, exploitable emotional spectrum. Their brains were wired for belief, for social hierarchy, for devotion. The Draconians saw a species that could be moulded, controlled, and ultimately subjugated not just by force, but by manipulating the very essence of their minds. This was a creature that could be taught to worship its own enslavers, to build its own cage, and to police its own descent. the perfect raw material. The long wait was over. The next phase of their plan could begin. They emerged from the shadows not as conquerors brandishing weapons, but as gods, teachers, and kings. They cloaked their alien forms in shimmering illusions, appearing to the fledgling human tribes as shining figures descended from the heavens. They brought knowledge, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, architecture. They taught humanity how to build cities, chart the stars, and create societies. But these gifts were never free. They were transactions. In exchange for knowledge, they demanded obedience. In exchange for civilization, they demanded worship. They positioned themselves at the apex of these new societies, the divine source of all authority, weaving their serpent and dragon iconography into the very fabric of human culture and religion. The foundations of their shadow empire were laid not with stone, but with belief. To secure their rule for millennia, they initiated the most insidious part of their plan: hybridization. The age-old tales of dragons demanding princesses, of gods descending to lay with mortal women, were not myths, but a distorted cultural memory of a systematic breeding program. The reptilians interbred with select human bloodlines. Those they had identified as having the most desirable traits of leadership and influence. This was not a union of equals. It was a calculated genetic infiltration. They created a hybrid ruling class: kings and queens, pharaohs and emperors who carried the draconian DNA within them. This divine right to rule was a literal truth. These bloodlines were easier to control, their minds more susceptible to the draconian psychic influence, and their loyalty assured through a shared, secret heritage. They became the unknowing wardens of humanity, ensuring their master's will was done for generations. But the human spirit proved more resilient than they anticipated. Despite their control, independent thought began to blossom, a dangerous weed in the carefully cultivated garden of their empire. Philosophers, scientists, and mystics began to ask questions, to look beyond the dogma they were fed. They started to piece together the truth, finding inconsistencies in the manufactured history, rediscovering fragments of forbidden knowledge. This could not be tolerated. The reptilians orchestrated a series of great purges, erasing history itself. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was not a tragic accident. It was a targeted strike. Across the globe, they instigated wars, riots, and religious fervor to destroy the world's greatest repositories of knowledge, burning any scroll, tablet, or codex that contained evidence of their existence, their influence, or the true history of humanity. As humanity entered a new era, the Draconians adapted their methods of control. They found a perfect new tool in the rigid dogma of organized religion. The burgeoning power of the Church, with its demand for absolute faith and its intolerance of dissent, was an ideal vehicle for their agenda. They infiltrated its hierarchy, their hybrid bloodlines and shape-shifting agents, rising to positions of immense power. The Vatican, the heart of Western Christendom, became their new stronghold, a fortress of faith built on a foundation of lies. From this seat of power, they unleashed new waves of persecution. The Inquisitions were not merely about religious purity. They were meticulously planned witch hunts, designed to eliminate specific bloodlines, to hunt down and exterminate anyone who possessed forbidden knowledge, and to instill a deep cultural fear of questioning authority. But even in the darkest of times, pockets of resistance endured. Secret societies, born from the ashes of the great purges, kept the flame of truth alive. They were the keepers of the lost knowledge, descendants of those who had seen the truth and survived. human smiths and scholars, working in hidden forges and secret libraries, began to fight back. They learned that the Draconians, for all their power, had vulnerabilities. Through painstaking research and dangerous experimentation, alchemists and metallurgists rediscovered ancient techniques, learning to imbue metals with specific resonant frequencies and elemental properties that could disrupt the biomorphic field of the shapeshifters, making them vulnerable, even mortal. These were not just weapons, they were symbols of defiance, forged in secret and tempered with hope. The greatest weapon of the shapeshifters was their ability to hide in plain sight. To combat this, the Resistance developed tools to pierce the veil of their deception. They discovered that certain crystalline structures, when ground into lenses and precisely calibrated, could refract light in a way that revealed the subtle energy field surrounding the Draconians, exposing their true form as a shimmering aura. They also learned that the shapeshifters' auditory range was different from humans. By generating specific sonic frequencies, they could cause the Draconians intense discomfort, forcing them to momentarily lose control of their human guise. For the first time, the Resistance had a way to identify their enemy. They could finally see the monsters hiding amongst them, in the royal courts, the halls of power, and the inner sanctums of the church. Throughout history, the story repeated itself across the globe. Many great kings and queens, from the plains of Africa to the mountains of the Andes, saw the truth and refused to submit. They rejected the poisoned gifts of the gods and would not allow their people to become cattle. They fought with incredible bravery, leading their armies against forces that were often secretly commanded or aided by the Draconians and their hybrid agents. But they fought a war on two fronts, one on the battlefield and another against the betrayal and subversion from within their own courts. One by one, these pockets of open defiance were crushed. Their kingdoms were lost, their histories rewritten by the victors, and their people enslaved or absorbed into the growing global empire. Each fallen kingdom was a tragedy, but also a lesson. Open warfare was not the answer. A new kind of war was needed. The shadow war for the future of Earth had begun. The year is 2025. The world is on fire. But this is a grand deception, a worldwide smokescreen of fire and blood designed to hide the real war. The history books, if any are ever written, will call this the era of the Great Distraction. They will detail the proxy wars that erupted across continents, the economic collapses that felt so sudden but were meticulously planned, the social fractures that turned neighbour against neighbour. Every headline, every breaking news alert, every political scandal was a brushstroke in their masterpiece of chaos. They engineered a world so loud, so full of manufactured emergencies, that no one would ever hear the silent footsteps of their advance.
They use our wars to move their assets, to test their weapons, and most importantly, to distract. We fight in the shadows of a world already burning. Every conventional conflict is a feint. While the world watches troops massing on a border, they're moving a geneticist into a hidden lab. While the markets panic over a new tariff, they're activating a new node in their financial network. We're not soldiers in a conventional sense. We're ghost hunters, fighting an enemy that wears the faces of our leaders, our scientists, our allies. Our battlefield is the space between the lines of official reports.
The enemy has evolved. For centuries, they operated through influence, through slow generational corruption. But now, their biology is their primary weapon. They are faster, stronger, and possess senses beyond our comprehension. And if humanity is to survive, it must evolve too. Faced with an extinction-level threat, the remnants of global intelligence agencies formed the Resistance. And the Resistance has made its most radical leap, the upgrading of human soldiers. We called it Project Chimera, a name whispered only in the deepest, most secure bunkers.
Commander, the Ethical Review Board is hesitant. We're not just augmenting soldiers anymore. We're fundamentally rewriting what it means to be human. The line between us and them, it's getting thinner with every sequence we splice. Are we creating saviors? Or are we just building a better class of monster to fight the ones already here? What happens when the war is over and these weapons want to come home? We have no precedent for this. No framework for the de-escalation of a biologically enhanced soldier.
The ethics board can debate from the safety of this bunker. I've seen what's out there. I've seen what they do to people who can't fight back. There is no after the war if we lose this. The line between us and them is simple. We are still fighting for humanity. They are not. Every tool we create, every line of code we rewrite in our own bodies, is in service to that one simple fact. We will hold that line. Let the historians worry about the ethics. Our job is to make sure there are historians left to write it.
Using CRISPR, we rewrite our own biology. Enhanced vision to see their camouflage, the subtle biosignatures that shimmer just outside the normal human spectrum. Accelerated healing, allowing tissue to regenerate in minutes instead of weeks. Superhuman strength, derived from myoma-laced muscle fibers. We are rebuilding ourselves into weapons, piece by painful piece. The first field tests were brutal. Volunteers suffered catastrophic cellular breakdown, but with each failure we learned. We refined the process, stabilized the gene sequences. Now our operatives are living instruments of war, their bodies tuned to a frequency of violence necessary for survival. The whispers of their agenda started to bleed into the public domain, dismissed as fringe conspiracy. But for the Resistance, these leaks were trailheads. The Epstein files were a Rosetta Stone, confirming their breeding programs had merely modernized. For generations, they had cultivated specific bloodlines, inserting their agents into positions of power. But the files showed a new phase, the industrialization of their hybridization. It wasn't just about influence anymore. It was about creating a subspecies, a ruling class that was biologically, fundamentally not human. To fund this global operation, they introduced cryptocurrency, an alien technology disguised as a human innovation. It was a system of perfect, untraceable control, presented to the world as financial liberation. They built the digital architecture, seeded the initial code, and then watched as humanity eagerly adopted it, forging its own chains. With every transaction, every mined coin, we fed a beast we couldn't see. They were siphoning the world's wealth, converting it into a liquid asset beyond the reach of any government or institution. A digital dragon's hoard for their new world order, the war chest for the final subjugation of Earth.
Commander, a signal from Kale. He's been silent for 3 years. He's inside the Vatican. They're preparing a progenitor event.
A mass production breeding facility. They're building an army of infiltrators. This is it. This is the mission we were made for.
A direct assault was suicide. But a surgical strike could cripple their agenda for a generation. We descended into the belly of the beast.
Stay sharp. The path back is gone. We're on our own.
You're too late, Jax, or perhaps right on time.
Why, Kale? Because they offered me a future. Humanity lost this war 65 million years ago. I just chose to be on the winning side.
The sting of betrayal was sharper than any blade. Our only way out was to destroy everything. The progenitor was a clone. They were stealing the DNA of their enemies to create the ultimate infiltrators. A Trojan horse built from the blood of heroes. I had the proof. I could not let their sacrifice be in vain. It was not a victory. It was a costly escape. The discovery sent a tremor through the resistance. Who could be trusted when the enemy could wear the face of a brother? The war for the planet had become a war for identity. The lines between human, hybrid, hero and infiltrator had been irrevocably blurred. They have suffered a devastating loss, but they have survived, and they have uncovered the enemy's most profound secret. The true war, the war for the soul of humanity, has only just begun. The enemy is deeper than ever. But for the first time, we can see the whole board.